My picture was on the front page of the Carthage Courier about 15 years ago. That's a big deal to your mother. My mother called me about that. Said, well, I see your picture's on the front page of the Courier this week. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, you going to be here Friday night to speak to the Farm Bureau? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, well, you didn't tell us. And then she said, and we probably won't come. But she said, you know, we don't get out much anymore. But she said, you know, your dad said he might come. And I didn't get my hopes up. But I got there at the high school that night, the high school cafeteria. And I looked back in the crowd, and there's my dad. Silver hair. And so I made the speech, and some people laughed. And my dad lingered. So I captive audience. Now, my dad wouldn't have hollered suey if an old sow was dragging him off in the tall weeds. I mean, he just was a man of few words. One time we went to the Riddleton farm, and I decided I was going to have a one-on-one with my dad all day. He would take us over there when we cut cedar. And so this particular day, I decided he's going to talk to me. So I spent a day asking him questions. I asked him, all I got was, huh? No, I guess. I don't know. Well, he got home that night, and the next day my mother came to me and she said, was anything wrong on the Riddleton farm yesterday? I said, no, ma'am, I don't reckon. She said, well, your daddy came home last night and said, what is wrong with Jack? She said, I don't reckon anything. He said, man, he would not shut up today. You couldn't get a word out of him edgewise. And so I've got my dad, and the people have left, and we're in the cafeteria, and I pull up this chair right across from him, and I start telling my father how a professional speaking career works. And I said, Dad, you tell these stories long enough, you tell them well enough, you can make a living in these great United States of America, going around sharing valuable information, inspiring people, making them laugh. I can make a living doing this. And I looked in his sky blue eyes, and I could tell he wasn't getting it. And finally I stopped and I said, Dad, do you understand what I'm saying? He said, no, son, I can't say that I do. And then I realized the only speakers my father had ever heard were country Baptist preachers and military training officers in World War II. The concept of a motivational humorist was not in his quiver of arrows. And so I said, Dad, do you understand what I'm saying? He said, no, son, I can't say that I do, but I'll tell you one thing. No matter what you try, I'm for you. Why, ladies and gentlemen, that'll do me till the day I die. In these days, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear a whole lot of people got a whole lot of things to say about the situation in our world. Some of it's going to be good. Some of you got a choice. You can talk it bad, or you can talk it up. How about this? Commit yourself to having something good to say. I'll take you a step further. Why don't you commit yourself to being the most positive person you know? As you think about that, and as you think about an uncertain world, let me ask you a question. Do you see yourself as a victim or a pioneer in the world in which you live? You see, if you see yourself as a pioneer, you expect difficulty. It's a great book by M. Scott Peck, and he opens up the book by saying life is difficult. And then he says, the sooner in your life you accept that fact, the more successful you'll be, because when things don't go well, you'll say, well, I kind of expected that. And pioneers, did they not expect difficulty? Can you imagine the pioneers in those covered wagons going across this great country of ours, arrows flying by their heads? One of them looks at the other and says, this is a stressful situation. No. They didn't even use the word stress. Why? Because they're pioneers. If you see yourself as a victim, you feel frustrated, powerless, hopeless, ultimately depressed. But if you see yourself as a pioneer, then you say, hey, life is difficult. I've got what it takes. Everything you need, ladies and gentlemen, to be successful and to be happily successful is within your reach. I was thinking this week when I used to walk the quarter-mile road from our house to Dewey Manning's General Store. And I was thinking how safe a 5-year-old boy was on that road, because everybody knew you and everybody was looking out for you. Well, I was as safe as I was with my own mom and dad, because all these great people in the community who you knew were as concerned about you as they were their own. And so it's difficult sometimes for us to leave what we call our comfort zones. But anytime we grow as a human being, we're being called to leave what's comfortable. One of my favorite comfort zones when I was growing up was when I stayed in the head of a holler in Riddleton, Tennessee. That's spelled Holllow, holler. My grandfather's name was Will Herod Brim. I've only known 2 Herods in my life. It's not a popular name, Herod. Not too many mothers name their sons Herod or Pontius or Judas. You know, there's some baggage that goes with the name. Not too many mothers name their daughters Delilah or Jezebel. I've not known many Jezebels in my time by name. I'm going to give you slower ones a minute to catch up with us. There's some baggage that got. His name was Will Herod Brim. His nickname was John Reuben. My mother, his only daughter, does not know where the name John Reuben came from. The people just called him John Reuben. I called him Pa Rube. He was as tight as a bark on a tree. He was as tight as Dick's hat band. He did not spend much money. This is a true story. When my grandfather wore out a shoe and replaced it, he only replaced the worn out shoe. Consequently, his shoes never matched. He had one he was just finishing off and one he was just getting started. When he died, in the closet we found a new shoe box with a right-footed shoe in it. He hadn't gotten to it yet. He was so eccentric he would not let me sleep in the room where he slept. And in the wintertime, I remember especially that they would send me to a room where there was no heat. Any of y'all ever slept in a room where there was no heat? You could see your breath when you opened the door. My grandmother, to save me from frostbite, would take this wool pillowcase and hold it up in front of the fireplace and get it smoking on both sides. And then at the appropriate moment, she'd say, "Let's go." And she'd run over and open this door, and I'd fly through that door and dive into the feather bed. Then I'd turn around, drop my feet off the floor. She would hold that pillowcase up and say, "Put your feet down in here." It would almost render you unconscious. There were times when it almost peeled the skin off my shins. It was hot. Then I would roll into bed and she would roll in behind me. We'd pull 27 pounds of quilts over our head, back up to each other, and then we'd hold still until the bed warmed up. And I was in my comfort zone. Anybody know what I dreaded the next morning? Cold hardwood floor. Felt like frozen concrete. Wake up the next morning, your nose felt like an icicle. And you were sore from sleeping under all that cover. Now this is an important thing for all of us. As badly as I didn't want to leave that, sinking down in that feather bed, warm, see your breath. As badly as I hated to leave that comfort zone, my grandmother has now created an incentive for me to draw me out of my comfort zone. Because now she has a black iron skillet on that wood stove and she is frying hog's jaw, side meat, country sausage, country ham. You're an educated audience, you're thinking cholesterol. We did not have cholesterol back in those days. If we had, we would have fried it in some fried meat grease. Y'all remember we used to save fried meat grease? My grandmother had jars of that stuff, make dog bread with it. If you cut your finger, put a little fried meat grease on it, that salt would kill anything. If I got a good case of chigger, she just greased me up. Of course, the dog followed me around for a couple of days. I smelled like a smokehouse. We had an outhouse. We've got hockey players in Tennessee now. You have to say outhouse. We had an outhouse. Y'all remember outhouses? A sign of prosperity back in those days was a two-holer. My question always was, who would you want to sit with?